When we talk about applied behavior analysis, it's just as important to understand why behaviors decrease as it is to know why they increase. So today we're going to dive into the three main types of punishers that explain this process, starting right from the basics. First things first, let's get our core definition straight. What do we actually mean by a punisher? Now, in ABA, this isn't about anger or getting even. It's a very technical term. A punisher is simply any consequence that happens right after a behavior and causes that behavior to happen less often in the future. The key here, and this is really important, is that its effect is always measured by a future decrease. If the behavior doesn't go down, then whatever happened wasn't a punisher. Simple as that. Okay, let's start with the most fundamental category, unconditioned punishers. You can think of these as nature's built-in consequences, the ones that work without any learning or experience needed.
So an unconditioned punisher, which we sometimes call a primary punisher, is a stimulus that is just inherently punishing. Its power doesn't come from experience. It's a product of our evolution, kind of hardwired into our biology to help us survive. Absolutely no learning is required for it to have an effect.
When you look at these examples, you can see how universal they are. Things like pain, getting suddenly very hot or very cold, a loud, unexpected noise, or a really awful smell. These are things that pretty much any person or animal will naturally want to avoid. You don't have to be taught that these things are bad news. To make this crystal clear, let's use a simple story. Imagine you're stranded on an island. You reach out and touch a rock that's been baking in the sun. The immediate, painful burn makes you snatch your hand back. And you know what? You're probably not going to touch hot-looking rocks again. That pain from the burn is the unconditioned punisher. It's a direct, unlearned consequence. All right, now let's build on that foundation. We're going to move from pure biology to personal experience with our second category, conditioned punishers. These are the ones that get their power through what we learn. So how does something become a conditioned punisher? Well, it always starts out as a neutral stimulus, something that on its own means absolutely nothing. But when that neutral stimulus gets repeatedly associated or what we call paired with an existing punisher, it starts to take on those punishing qualities all by itself. Let's walk through how this pairing process actually works. First, you start with something neutral, like a teacher giving a student a disapproving look. In step 2, that look is consistently followed by a real consequence, like the student losing some of their free time. After this happens enough times, we get to step 3. The look alone is now powerful enough to decrease the behavior. It has become a conditioned punisher. And you can see some really common examples here. Words like no, or disappointed look, or even a red X on your homework. None of these things are inherently painful. They only get their power because we've learned over time that they're associated with other, more negative outcomes. Let's head back to our island for a minute. You've been there a while, and you've noticed that the locals put little red flags in the ground near the hot rocks. Now, the flag itself is just a piece of cloth. It can't burn you. But because you've learned to associate that flag with the pain of the hot rock, just seeing a red flag is now enough to make you steer clear of the area. The flag has become a conditioned punisher.
This brings us to our third and you could say most versatile type, the generalized conditioned punisher. This is where the concept really expands to explain a lot of complex social behaviors.
So what makes it generalized? Well, it's a conditioned punisher. But instead of being paired with just one other punisher, it has been paired with many different kinds of punishers, both unconditioned and conditioned, across all sorts of situations. And here's why that's so important. Its effectiveness is incredibly consistent. Because it's been linked to so many different bad outcomes, it doesn't really depend on what you want or don't want in that specific moment. A concept we call a motivating operation. A generalized punisher tends to work pretty much anytime, anywhere. The absolute classic example of this is the word no. Think about it. A child has heard the word no right before a toy was taken away, before being put in timeout, before hearing a stern voice, you name it. The same goes for things like a disapproving look or getting a fine. They're powerful because they signal a whole menu of potential negative outcomes. Let's finish up our island story. Imagine there's a loud siren on the island. Over time, that siren has gone off right before all kinds of dangers, before hot rocks were found, before big storms hit, and before dangerous animals were spotted. Because it's been paired with every type of danger, just hearing that siren makes you stop whatever you're doing and find safety, even if you don't know what the specific threat is. That siren has become a generalized conditioned punisher. Okay, so we've gone through all three types. Now, I think the best way to really lock this in is to put them all side by side and see how they stack up against each other.
Let's break this table down. First, let's look at their origin. Unconditioned punishers are innate. We're born with them. Conditioned punishers are learned through pairing with one other punisher. And then generalized punishers are learned through pairing with multiple other punishers. Next, their dependency on what's motivating us. Unconditioned punishers are highly dependent on our current biological state. Conditioned punishers can be, but generalized punishers are largely independent, which is what makes them so consistently effective. So you might be thinking, this is interesting theory, but why do these specific distinctions actually matter in the real world? Let's talk about why this is so much more than just academic. For anyone working in behavior analysis, knowing these differences is absolutely essential. It allows us to design interventions that are not only effective, but also ethical and precise. It means we can often use the least intrusive methods necessary. For example, using a learned social signal, which is a conditioned punisher, instead of something aversive and unconditioned. If you remember just one thing from our discussion today, I hope it's this phrase. It perfectly sums up the core idea. Unconditioned stings naturally. Conditioned stings eventually. Generalized stings everywhere. It's a great little mental shortcut for their origin and their power. And that brings us to a final thought to leave you with. As you go about your week, start to notice how these different forces are at play. From the unlearned sting of a paper cut to the learned sting of a critical remark and the generalized sting of seeing a parking ticket on your car, these principles are constantly and often subtly shaping our behavior every single day. Thanks for joining me.